Hey, this is Darren and Michael, the Soul of the Man podcast. We got a good one for you today. We are ready. I had the pleasure of meeting this young lady just about 10 years ago. Yeah, it's been that long. My wife and I, who was actually my fiance at the time, were going into couples counseling, premarital couples counseling, with our pastor and co-pastor at Have Life Church. Shout out Have Life. And Crystal worked for co-pastor Jackie White. You were her assistant.
I was.
Yeah. And Crystal said, y'all come on this way. Just this sweet, sweet disposition about her. Just again, I had a pleasure of meeting her. So did my wife. I look at Crystal and I think she's this cross between CeCe Winans' Alabaster Box, and then she's this cross. If you mess with her, your family, her family, her husband, she's this cross of Diamond and Princess from Crime Mob. And if you buck had a face.
I ain't a killer, but don't push.
Come on, come on. She's with us here today. She's a licensed therapist.
Yes.
She is what I consider the ultimate cycle breaker. To hear her story, to know where she's come from, I think you're going to be blessed by it. And I want to give a shout out actually to her amazing husband as well. He has stuck by her side. They have formed this great bond together. He's actually our media partner. 1224 Media, yes. Donald Curry and team, thank you so much for all you do.
DC.
Thank you for allowing us to talk to your wife today. You didn't have to, but you did. Crystal, you didn't have to be here, but you are.
Absolutely had to be
Let's
here.
go ahead and get this party started.
Let's get it
So
started.
I had a little bit about your background, and we're going to shut up after that.
Okay.
So, born in a group home in Charlotte, North Carolina,
Yes.
to parents who were 13 and 14 years of age. Babies. Parents that today or then or whatever were young enough to be your siblings.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about Crystal. Give us the background.
Yeah, so me and my parents are literally like 13 years apart, if you think about that. And so, my birth was a result of their only family, their family's dysfunction. And they stayed across the street from each other. They were never together. But when my mom got pregnant with me, the story goes, her family was like, okay, you can't have a baby, right? So you can stay, was what they said to my mom, but she can't stay, meaning me. And my mom made a decision that she wanted to keep me, and so she was shipped off to Charlotte, where there was a group home for pregnant teenagers, because this was in the 80s,
Wow.
So, the image of the black family back then was really important. Right. And so she had me, and then she went back home, and I was not allowed to stay with her. So for like the first 5 years of my life, I bounced around from family members to friends. And then when she was 18, I was 5, and she came and got me. She was still a baby. Wow. And so growing up with her, I was exposed to a lot. She did the best she could, but it didn't negate from the experiences that I saw. And I didn't realize how dysfunctional my thought processes were until I got older and got in my own relationships and got married and had kids. Because whatever the house you grew up in was like, that is how your brain thinks you should be and how the world is. And that is how you respond. And so I went on my own healing journey, and I learned very quickly, especially in the Black community, that there are rules to healing where the father, you can talk about all you want to. You can talk about them until, they are nothing, but the Black mother is protected and can do nothing wrong. Right. But I needed to be healed from both of them because my dad was inconsistent, absent, and my mom was emotionally unhealthy. And so I was shunned. The scripture was used and weaponized against me. They told me that because I had a mother and father, I should be honorable, and my desire to tell my story and heal was dishonorable, and that I should be grateful that I did have parents. And I went through this whole process, and even my family was trying to say that they didn't want me to tell my story because it forced them to look at themselves, and so I was shunned in that way too. But I kept going, and I told God, God, if you help me get through this emotional suffering, then I desire to create safe spaces for people who are in my situation, and He did that, and so that is my life work now, creating safe spaces for people to heal.
Wow.
Wow.
Amazing.
Yes, thank you.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Hear and really see so much now in regards to data that shows individuals that are born into, and I'll use poverty, born into poverty, not being able to ever break out of it. And I know that's a real blanketed statement, but statistics to really back that up. So to hear you talk, it seems to be describing some of that same type of a scenario. You born into a situation, two babies themselves, but have done the work obviously to come out of that and be the person that you are today. What did that work entail?
Oh, it took years. It took years because, research shows us that your childhood trauma, and when we talk about trauma, we just talk about whatever as a child you experienced that you were unable to cope with. Like you just were not old enough to be exposed to it, right? It shows up in your personality. So it can be very deceiving, right? So when people say, this is just how I am, they accept that and think that this is just how they should be. So it took a lot of time because I had to literally unpack who I thought I was and really had to question, why do I know what I know? How did I come to know what I know? Why do I act this way? And I found out very quickly that I acted the way that I acted because of some internal beliefs that I had based on what I experienced in my childhood. So when you talk about poverty, research shows us that poverty is more traumatic than child abuse, right? Because as a child, you no longer trust the people in charge of you to take care of you. So you have to start thinking of a way to take care of yourself. And as a child, that's not something that we are developmentally healthy to do. And so I had to go to retreats. I went to individual therapy. I went to marriage therapy. I had mentors. I had time that I had to just take away from work because it is brutal work. It is gut-wrenching work. It is a death to your unhealthy self in order to kind of like become this healthy person that is no longer influenced or controlled by the childhood experiences that you encountered growing up.
How did it manifest itself in your personality? How did it show up in your
Yeah.
personality?
So one, I was a people pleaser, right? And so adults who are people pleasers start out as parent pleasers. And so people pleasers desire to belong or feel wanted by what they do. Because growing up, maybe your mom was too busy or your dad wasn't around, and you felt like you had to go into their world in order for them to pay attention to you or make you feel like you mattered. So because of that, because my mom was busy trying to work, my daddy wasn't present, I was quickly able to recognize what I could do for them to get their attention. And so that just developed into my adulthood where I did the same thing. A rescuer, right? I didn't want people to suffer the way that I suffered emotionally, financially, or just in life. So if you have a problem, come to me and I'm going to fix it, right? I'm going to put on my cape. I'm going to rush. I'm going to help you, right? Another thing was an overachiever, right? Because research shows people whose fathers are inconsistent or absent, they feel like there is something innately wrong with them. So because something is innately wrong with me, I have to take something external and add it to myself. So that's where titles come in. That's where, clothing and brands come in. You're just constantly doing stuff to add value to yourself because your dad's absence or inconsistency made you feel like something was wrong with you. So it didn't come out for me with clothing or like material things. It was titles and overworking. So I would constantly work, and every time I would reach a goal, I would move the goalpost to another goal because it was always like I have to be doing more because that is a part of who I am.
So I got a question based on that comment.
Yeah.
Because that's something I hear a lot from men, because typically we are defined by what we do. You know, title,
Yeah, yeah.
chasing the bag,
Yeah.
success. You're a woman and you're saying that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I mean, that's typically something I hear men say. I don't hear many women saying that. Talk about that just a little more for me, because that's interesting.
Yeah. So historically, especially like in Black families, the boys are really only celebrated for what they do, not who they are, right? You do great in sports. You know, you're doing a great job helping your sister. You know, you're great at this or you're great at that. But you're never really celebrated just for who you are without doing anything.
Wow.
Right? And so it was this great report that came out. And so if you have a son, if you love men, if you know, have men in your family that you love, you should read it. It's called Ring the Alarm. And it was a report that the National Black Caucus had to put out based on the direction of Congress, because what they found out was Black boys were killing themselves at a higher rate than their white counterparts. Wow. And you know that things are bad when Congress has to make a call for Black people, right? Wow. And what they found was that what we just talked about is that Black boys kill themselves more frequently and more suddenly because of how they are treated in their families. Wow. And how they are not allowed to feel and how they are not allowed to be human beings and experience life like their sisters or their female cousins are. They're told how to feel, they're told what to think, and then when life starts lifing or when the stressors come, they are unable to cope.
Wow. So mind blown. And we're just getting started.
Yeah. So happy to be here.
So born to 13 and 14-year-old parents, shunned, sent to a group home, born in that group home, mother sent to a group home, you're born in that group home. To heal, there's got to be some forgiveness.
Oh, yeah.
Because you can't heal unless you forgive. And that is a lot of forgiving you had to do.
Yes, it was a lot. It was a lot.
Talk about it.
So first I went through a process where I thought forgiveness looked like reconnecting with them and trying to change them, right? So that didn't work. So what I had to accept is that how my family is, how my parents are, works for them. I don't like it. I need to adjust and change, right? And I have to accept that who they are is who they are and stop trying to change them. That was my first step to trying to forgive, because I couldn't forgive because I was trying to change them because I was so afraid that they would continue to hurt me the way that they did in the past. But if they changed, that meant that they wouldn't hurt me, and so I could forgive them and move on, right? So my forgiveness was really accepting that who they are is who they are, and that in order for me to grow and be healthy, I have to forgive them even if they never apologize or acknowledge what they've done. Whew. So I had to sit in that. I had to accept that. I had to unpack all of these traumatic experiences. And it was brutal and it really hurt, but I'm so grateful that I did it. And then thirdly, I had to recognize, because I am a believer, that if I choose to intentionally not do the work to forgive them, I believe my standard for forgiveness is higher than Jesus' salvation.
Wow. Can you repeat that? You just said a mouthful.
Yes. So if I choose not to do the work to forgive them, I believe that my standard for forgiveness is higher than Jesus' salvation.
Wow. You know, we could end the pod on that. That's a mic drop moment. We could really end it on that, because that's bananas. But we won't, because I know we need to hear some more.
Yeah. We are both girl dads. How important is a father in his little girl's life?
Oh God, it's so important because mom and dad have separate roles when it comes to child upbringing. Dads specifically, when it comes to the girls, dads teach girls how to take risk. And pretty much you teach girls that you don't have to conform to the world. you take the world by storm, right? Mothers, on the other hand, are kind of like safe and you got to be okay, make sure you're okay and stuff like that. Dads are like, no, right? The world needs to be ready for you. But also, because we talk about how your childhood home prepares you for the world, and it makes you, it grooms you and it trains you for how the world is going to be. Fathers, when it comes to daughters, set the daughters up and teach the daughters on how they should accept love from anybody, not just men, right? They set the standards for relationships, because it's easy to see their mom, and because they're a girl and they see their mom's a girl, it's easy to recognize how that relationship should be. But how do you have relationships for people that don't look like you? How do you form those relationships? How should they treat you? And so dads are an important part of that.
Well, I've always said I thought dads set the precedence in the household.
Absolutely.
Okay.
But these things you had to learn on your own.
And failed miserably many times.
How so?
Well, one, I'm married now. We'll be married like 9 years.
Congratulations.
Next month, thank you. But because I grew up in a house with only a mother, I did not know how to listen to the voice of a man. Right? So mothers carry the voice of care. Fathers carry the voice of justice. My husband has a voice of justice, but because I didn't grow up in a house of justice, my mind didn't even know how to comprehend that. And my mind wanted my voice to be the loudest voice in the house, which does not work, when you're married, right? And so because of that, it was much easier for my mind to say, well, you know how to be in a house with only a mother and kids. Just get a divorce. You know how to function in that, but you don't know how to function in a house where there is a mom and a dad. Wow. And so part of my failing was trying to leave my marriage so that I can revert back to what I was unconsciously accustomed to, wow. And that was being a single mom.
Wow. How did you, when you and DC got together, because I can't imagine that conversation. Like, okay, now we're dating. There's some things you need to know about me. I need to be transparent on some things.
Yeah.
How did that conversation take place, if you can recall?
And when? How deep into the relationship?
Right, how deep into the relationship? How did you have that conversation, and how did he receive it?
Yeah, so we had the conversation. I mean, we went to premarital counseling, but I still didn't realize the depth of it, the depth of my own trauma and his too. So it really didn't get real until our honeymoon. Like it was initially like crazy. It was literally like he had a mirror and he was holding it up to me. And I'm looking in the mirror, looking at myself, but because self-preservation and defensiveness is the most innate way that people protect themselves, I was so defensive. I was trying to preserve myself. And so I was just deflecting and projecting. And so it caused a lot of issues for a really long time until I really decided to because I had started my healing journey, but it really got intense when I got married.
How long did you guys date before you got married?
About 2 years.
All right. So it didn't come out like early on?
Little bit.
Okay.
Little bit. It was, I would say it was like leaking, right? Leaking out. And then when I got married, the dam broke.
Wow.
So wait a minute. Okay. Because like for my wife and I, when we got married, I had to disclose a whole lot.
Yeah.
Well before.
Yeah.
So she had a choice to say, yeah, I can deal with this, or no, I can't.
Yeah.
And I was intentional about that. So it sounded like, so she knew everything before she had a chance to say yes.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, here's your time to run away. But for you guys, it sounded like, all right, we're going to go down this journey together.
Yeah.
And oh, by the way,
yeah.
here's a little bit.
Well, it was more, I told him about my family dynamics,
okay.
right? And what I had gone through. But just because you talk about it doesn't mean you're healed from it.
Yep.
Gotcha.
Right? So I told him and he was aware, but we had no idea the depth of it and how much it was going to affect. We had no idea. Yeah. So we were both like shocked.
Wow.
Relationship with parents?
Yeah, so I have a relationship with my family. So my dad remarried. My mom's not remarried, but I have a relationship with them, and it is exactly the way that it's supposed to be at this point. Neither one of us are like pushing it. I see my dad more than I see my mom, but I think that's just because of proximity. But I'm okay with the way things are because before I really wanted what I never had, right? But I had to learn and through my own healing journey that they could not give me or feel or heal the emotional wounds that I had because I was no longer 7. I was no longer 9. I was no longer 13. I had to heal those. And in order for them to heal those, they had to be the parent that I had made up for them to be, right? I only had these expectations of them, not because they showed me they could be these people, but because I, in my mind, created the people that I wanted them to be. And that was pretty unfair. So I had to literally accept them as they are, but that also meant I had to heal the wounds on my own. And so now things are good.
Great. And they have a good relationship with the grandkid, your babies and everything? Okay, good. That's good.
Wow. Wow. Uh, the healing process, do you ever hit the point where I am healed, or is it ongoing?
Yeah, it is definitely ongoing. I ca- I say it's like an onion, right? There's layers to it. So there are certain things that I thought I healed from when I got married, and then I had kids, and I had to heal a little bit deeper. Right? And then you grow in business and you have to heal a little bit deeper because you recognize that certain things are rising in you or you're responding to certain things. It's like, okay, I thought I was done with that. I was done with it on stage 2. Now we're on stage 3, right? And so we're never really healed from anything until, we go to glory, but it makes life a little bit more easier to live.
Got it. Got it.
On another note, on that question. So you go through this childhood trauma. Then you decided to become a licensed therapist to help people deal with traumas.
Yeah.
You could have easily said, you know what, I'm going to go be an accountant. I'm going to be an engineer. I'm going to travel the world. I'm going to run away from this. You ran straight to it.
I did.
How do you not get triggered when you're helping other people deal with what they're dealing with? How do you not get triggered from helping other people?
Yeah, so I didn't start. So I got my license. It's very interesting. You told the story about how we met because when I was an assistant, I was also a licensed therapist. I had my master's, I had my license, but God said don't do nothing for about 8 years, and I did nothing. And that is the 8 years that I was really, really kind of like working on myself and healing. So I didn't help people until I was in a place where I could be helpful. I didn't want to bleed on people. I didn't want to leak or vomit on people, right?
Wow.
And so I'm because of what I've been through, I am, and I'm sure of this, anointed to help other people because it was a really tough journey for me to heal. And during that time, me and God made me some promises. And he was like, if you go through this journey, it won't take you long to help other people. And so I'm good, right? And so when I work with people, it doesn't take me long to help them. And I'm grateful for that. But and I have a great support system. I have a really normal life outside of the therapy room. And so that really helps. Kids don't care what you do, right? Like,
Or who you are.
Like, they don't care who you are or what you do, right? They'll humble you real quick, so.
So you bring up the kids, so I had to ask. We've all left the hospital. I heard some comedian at one point say, you get a manual to learn how to work a VCR.
Yeah.
And so you get this bundle of joy,
Right.
get them in the car seat, and learn how to put the car seat on, and then they send you home. And it's like, all right, I read all the, we read all the books and this and that and this and the other, and immediately start making mistakes.
Right.
But I did see what it looked like in my own home. How did it translate for you as a new mother as you started your family?
Yeah, so I tried to go to the opposite end of the spectrum. Like, I knew what I experienced and what I had seen in my childhood. So I try to go as farthest away from that, which is horrible. Don't do it. Do not recommend, because that creates its own dysfunctional patterns and cycles, right? The goal is to intertwine what you experience and what you learn to what you want to do, right? Instead of just trying to separate yourself from what happened in the past. And so when I went to the other end of the spectrum, it was really, really hard because I was trying to be a perfect parent, right? And I was trying to make no mistakes. I didn't want my kids to have trauma and all of this stuff. And then I had to, with my own wrestling, spiritually, emotionally, and mentally, recognizing that I'm going to make mistakes and I am supposed to make mistakes because I am human, and that God's love covers every mistake that I'm going to make. So if I stay submitted to Him and I just parent based on what I know what to do at the time, everything will be taken care of.
You talk about God a
Yes.
lot, which I think is great.
Oh, whew. Yeah.
And this is a dumb question, but they say there are no dumb questions.
there's
But
no dumb
I'm going to
question.
ask this question. How important is your relationship with God, Jesus being in you? Just talk about how important it is so everybody will know.
Yeah, it's so important because to me today, because it has been a journey, right? Because for a long time, I was very upset with God because I said, God, you are all knowing, yet you allow these things to happen to me, and you knew how they would impact me. If you are a loving God, why in the world would you do that? Right? And so we wrestled with that for a very long time. And I grew up very Baptist, right? So you're not allowed to question God about anything, right? Right. You suffer, it's good to suffer.
Suffering, long suffering.
Right. Long suffering is good. So when I had to unpack and kind of die to those unhealthy things, what I was taught about God also had to die. Because when I had to ask Him those questions and be very honest, I was able to be exposed to the sovereignty of God, the one that is big enough to understand and handle the questions that I have. And so we had I know I'm talking about Him like a person, but I do talk to Him like He's a human being.
No.
But having those conversations, and in those conversations, feeling the love that He has for me, and Him literally saying to me, I never told them to do that to you.
Wow.
They did that on their own.
Wow.
That was never my intent. But because I love you so much, I won't allow it to be wasted. And I lean on Him every day. Talk to Him every day, because life still happens to me.
Yes.
But I recognize that God loves me, and I remember and I always remind myself of when He was forming me and counting the hairs on my head and telling me how special I was and ordaining me and anointing me for the journey ahead that He knew was coming. Like, I remind myself of that. And so the love that God has for me is very, very important to me, because it hasn't always been. I haven't always felt that.
Got it.
Wow. Personally, battling some church hurt. You hear it a lot? You hear
Yeah,
it a lot?
I hear about church hurt a lot.
Yeah. I worked for a church for 4 years, and actually, when DC and I first met, we talked about working in the church and for the church, and it's different.
It is very different.
And haven't gotten back to spiritual, without question, but haven't gotten back to the structure of church because of my church hurt.
Yeah.
And just curious if you hear that from folks.
Yeah, I do. And it's a real thing, right? And I would even encourage people to identify, like, why do you feel hurt? Was it that your expectations were met? Was it that you were being mismanaged? Was it that you were being used? Like, what was it? And because oftentimes when people hurt us, even in the church, we don't address the little signs initially. We allow the little buckets of water, the little drops of water, to keep filling up in the bucket. And then when it finally spills over, it's this big hurtful thing, right? So it's kind of like, why didn't I protect myself sooner? Even though this is the church, I mean, it's a business, right? But why? What was it about me? Because even though it happened in the church, it also is happening in other areas too. Right? It's just not isolated. So I would even first you have to go to therapy and then figure out what is it about me that kind of did not put myself first and put my needs first.
Got it. Got it. Have a question about therapy
Yep.
on a bigger scale, but I'm gonna back up. I had a conversation with some coworkers in a staff meeting, and it was the Monday after the slap heard around the world, the Oscars from 2 years ago, and everybody was in the room, and some folks that don't look like me were having a great laugh about the whole thing. And I stopped the meeting and said, "Hey, you know what? This is a real teachable moment."
Yeah.
And everybody's looking puzzled and said, the black community isn't laughing about this
Right.
today. We are in here. We've code switched. We put on our business face mask,
Yes.
and we've come in here, and you all are having a good kiki laugh about this. And my community is actually hurt,
Right.
because what we witnessed was two hurt black men expressing emotions in the wrong way
Right.
towards each other.
Right.
As black men, and not shunning black women at all in this regard, because we're all getting this trauma on top of trauma on top of trauma. I didn't think I could see anything more worse than George Floyd,
Right.
2020.
Right.
And the world finally sat up and said, "This is an atrocity. How? This is what they have been talking about."
Right.
So we get past George Floyd, and here's the next incident, and here's the next incident, here's the next incident, and the next and the next. It's too much.
So much. So much.
How do you keep going with that much trauma, either known or that you're either conscious about or it's in your subconscious, and you're just getting these razor nicks every day, every day. Another cut, another cut, another cut. Go in the street and somebody grabs the person, walks to the other side of the street, another cut. Somebody says, something that is implicit bias.
Right.
Another cut.
Right.
How do you deal with all of those cuts and keep it together?
Yeah. So as a therapist, I am always going to push therapy. It is a non-judgmental space for black men to talk about anything, right? And to unpack how you're feeling that you may not even know, right? And then creating safe spaces in your home with your friend groups to have discussions, right? You can't walk around and act like what's happening is not impacting you just because you don't see it on your skin. Right? Because it's mental, because it's emotional. People think I'm just going to go about my day and it's never going to impact me. Then 3 days later, you irritable and you can't shake it and you don't know why. That's because of what we call secondary trauma. And that's when you don't have to experience the trauma. If you just hear about it or if you see it, you start to take on the symptoms of the person as though you were the one that experienced it. Right? So you got a question?
That's a woo, because you just hit home. You're on my pew now, as they say.
Oh, I'm on your pew.
Yeah.
So you cannot underestimate what life is doing to you, and you can't see it. So you have to go to therapy. You have to have those safe spaces.
Maybe a silly question.
No silly question.
For a black man, should I seek a black male therapist?
You don't have to. You can if you want to. It's all about your comfortability. I see black men, and I think it's so dope because, a lot of my sessions are virtual. And for example, I had a black man that just had a girl. And he was so excited because of the work that he had done with his hands to be a provider, but also the work that he had done with his heart and his mind. And so giving me a tour of the nursery and what he's going to do with his baby and sing and stuff like that, and tapping into that vulnerable place that he was never allowed to go growing up, is something that I will never take for granted. So you can go to a woman, you can go to a male, you can go white, Asian, whatever you want to go. Just go.
Help.
Just go.
What's the stigma with us that and I believe in therapy.
Yeah,
100%. This is my
Yeah.
camera. I believe in therapy 100%.
Right.
Have used it, have benefited from it. Hold on. What is the stigma in our community that doesn't allow us to do?
Yes, as Black people, we're very proud and private people, right? We were raised that way. So remember me talking about however your home was, that's how you're going to be, that's how you view the world. So if you, Black people, we grow up in a house where you don't tell our business, right, to nobody outside of this house. Whatever happens in this house stays in this house. You grow up, whatever happens in my head stays in my head. Whatever happens in my life stays in my life. And it is against the rules to talk about it with an outsider, and therapists are considered outsiders. So that is where the stigma comes from.
And I too, look at my camera. I too believe in therapy.
Yeah.
I've had a lot of it.
Yeah,
I believe that even when things are going great in your life,
absolutely,
you need to go to therapy.
absolutely,
Because
Never have done that.
oh, absolutely.
it's funny. I remember my life was going so well that I almost couldn't believe it was going this well. So I needed to talk to someone because it scared me how well my life was going. Because when
Yeah.
you're used to just stuff falling down around you, that
Right.
becomes your norm and you can live in your norm.
Right, right,
So now I have this, not perfect because no life is perfect, but I have this
Right.
great life going on.
right.
And I'm like, how do I deal with this? When is the other shoe going to drop?
Yeah,
So I need to go to therapy to figure it out. And then the therapist told me, they said, you know what? You got a car, right? I'm like, yeah. You driving along and your car runs smooth. Do you take your car in for oil changes? Do you take your car in for routine maintenance?
absolutely.
This is routine maintenance.
Absolutely.
So to my brothers and sisters out there, even if
Right.
it's going well, go to therapy.
Right.
Because trust me, there's going to be a rainy day somewhere.
Absolutely.
And it teaches us how to deal with it
Right.
and move forward.
Right.
Can we shift gears?
Sure, let's shift.
Because we're going to be, this time is going to be too quick, first of all.
You'll be back.
Yes,
Oh,
please.
good. Thank y'all
Yes.
for inviting me
Let's
back.
talk about Cycle Breakers 2023.
Yeah.
You just had this
I
conference.
just had this conference
In Charlotte.
It was amazing.
Talk about it.
First one.
Yeah, it was my
The
first
inaugural,
conference.
yes.
It was the inaugural conference. Over 100 people and their families coming to break cycles. We healed trauma, and we broke unhealthy family patterns. People brought their grandmas. It was an 80-year-old there. And I said, why did you come? She said, because I recognize I still got stuff that I need to deal with, and I don't want to die with this.
Wow.
Absolutely amazing, right? It was couples there, individuals like myself who you are just standing in the gap for your family, right? But just learning how to be better. We talked about emotional intelligence. We talked about how to build your future with your words. We talk about healing the inner man. We talked about unboxing the parenting paradigm, where you having to understand but maybe not accept who your parents are and why they did what they did. And we talked about transgenerational trauma, so which is trauma that is passed down from generation to generation.
Got it. So, no, go ahead, brother.
You mentioned one of the things that you worked on there, building your future with your words.
Oh, yeah.
How powerful is the tongue?
So powerful. So powerful. But we are, in the Black community, we're not raised to talk how we want our lives to be, right? Oftentimes, we are talked at, and people describe us in our family by what we're not doing well, right? That's how we're taught. But we have to shift that and really recognize that I can have a feeling and I can have an experience, but I don't have to speak that into my future. And so it's so important. Your world is a reflection of your words.
So at your conference, I didn't attend because it was spring break and had to take the kids to the beach, or I was going to get beat up.
Yeah.
But I did see that you had an all men's panel.
I did.
Why was that important? Number one. And number two, what do you think the men who were on the panel got out of it, and then the audience, what did they get out of it?
Yeah, so it was so important for me to have a men's panel because giving a space for men to talk about their life was important. Also, the men on the panel have done the work. So there were men in the audience who needed to see men, real men, who had childhood trauma, who were married, who had families, who were dealing with inconsistent fathers or mothers, but still doing the work so they can show up in their own lives. That was important because that is often overlooked. And I believe that the men who were on the panel were given an opportunity to really show that it can be done, right? Because a lot of what you can overcome just comes by exposure, right? So they were able to really show and talk about the fruits of their work and how their healing journey has worked for them. And then the men in the audience were able to see people who've done it. So the men on the panel, they talked about being abused and molested. They talked about their moms having to run from their dad. They talked about being homeless and impoverished. And they talked about their dad being not there, right? All of the things that men go through, but they don't talk about. Because especially when it comes to molestation, boys are on average molested more often than girls. And when you think about sexual abuse, we often think as the boy being the offender and the girl being the victim. But there are a lot of boys who have been the victim and the female being the offender. Wow. Right. And so I really wanted that to be talked about on the panel, too, because it's an average of about 3 out of 10 men who have been abused.
And it's by women.
By women or men.
Okay.
But I just wanted to bring up the fact that when you think of abuse sexually, you often think of the boy or the man as the offender and not the victim. And that's not the case.
Got it. Wow.
Got it. Wow.
Yeah. So Cycle Breakers 2024.
Yes.
Let's go ahead and pub it.
The Cycle Breakers 2024, it is 2 days in Charlotte, North Carolina. I am bringing some heavy hitters this year. The tickets are on sale, crystalcurry.com. Bring your mom, your husband, your wife, whomever you want to break cycles with, because I recognize that cycle breakers need a place where they can get an all-inclusive healing experience, and you're going to get that at the Cycle Breakers Conference.
Perfect.
Fantastic.
Yes.
So,
What brings you joy?
Oh, listen, it's a lot of things that bring me joy. Listen, when you have had to pull yourself out of the darkness so many times, there is not a lot that won't bring you happiness. But just the ability to help people, that brings me joy. When I have a client call and say, hey, my daddy called me from the rehabilitation center because I had the conversation with them that we talked about, seeing that my kids are happy and they have joy. My husband, I'm doing better there. I'm doing better as a wife, but just life, because I remember when I did not think that I would live to see or experience my life this way. Wow. And I am very grateful. I always tell people, you never know what it's like to have to live after you've wanted to die. If you've never wanted to kill yourself and have to wake up the next day, you never know what it's like, right? And so it just doesn't, the sun makes me happy, eating good food makes me happy, connecting with my friends, meeting new people. It all brings me joy because I would have never thought my life would be like this.
Wow.
So what's the Crystal Curry legacy? And what does it look like?
Man, listen, I am coming after legions that have been assigned to family, period. And I am going to win, period, because I have all of heaven behind me. And there is no shadow of doubt in my mind that families are going to be healed and free and come together. Historically, there has been attack on Black families, but we're done with that, right? Because people like us, we are the bridge between the past and the future, and we're going to bridge the gap between what was and what needs to be. And so that is part of my legacy. When people think of me, I want them to think of the person that help people break cycles and bring families together.
You know what? I'm thinking we need to end on that note.
All right.
Well, look, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on the Soul of the Man podcast.
Yes.
we want you to be a reoccurring guest.
Oh, tell me. I will come.
Because there's some people who need to be healed. You got two people on this couch who we're healing on a daily basis.
Good. I'm so happy for y'all.
This has been great.
Thank y'all for letting me come.
Two regular guys who, are, Dan said, still trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
And don't have the training. All we're offering is perspective.
Yeah.
But we understand resources and good resources.
Yeah.
And so happy that you came to be a part of this. So happy
So
you came
dope.
to be a part of this. Thank you.
Oh, no, thank you guys.
So, hey guys, that's it. From our soul to yours. Thank you for joining the Soul of a Man podcast.